Going solo May 1978. So we're on this giant roller coaster at Magic Mountain, just me and my friend Don Wasley, the vice president of marketing for Casablanca Records, and his daughter. I've been a coaster fanatic my whole life, from the time I was a kid in New York, riding the old wooden coaster at Coney Island. I love the speed, the excitement, the carefully controlled sense of chaos and impending doom. Roller coasters are safe and fun, but they feel just a little bit dangerous. I seek them out on the road in the same way that some people look for museums or art galleries or great restaurants. The brand new Colossus at Magic Mountain, a towering double-tracker with 2 stomach-churning drops in excess of 100 vertical feet, is on the must-ride list for any coaster nut, and I certainly qualify. So we're standing in line, chatting casually as the crowd snakes its way along, all of us willing to wait nearly an hour for the chance to spend 2 or 3 minutes on the Colossus. By the time we finally get to the point where you enter the roller coaster, the Southern California sky has turned gray and a light sprinkle has begun to fall. "Oh, man," I say to Don. "Yeah, bad luck." Protocol usually dictates that rides are shut down almost immediately in the event of bad weather, but the Colossus is new and easily the star attraction at Magic Mountain. A bunch of college kids are operating the ride and everyone in line is bitching about having wasted an hour without getting their roller coaster rocks off. "Come on, one more trip," someone shouts. "Yeah, it's not that bad." The college kids relent and open the gate, and pretty soon we're chugging up the first hill, the clackety-clack of the tracks filing the air. My heart begins to race, as it always does on the first ascent. But then, just as we reach the peak, something happens. The weather worsens. Suddenly the rain starts coming down more heavily and we're roaring down the first drop, the rain splashing against our faces. People are screaming, but I'm not sure they understand what's going on. As we hit the first turn I can tell we're going faster than normal. Usually you can feel the brakes on a coaster, but here there is a palpable sense of acceleration at a point when we should be slowing down. Oh shit! Especially on these great old woodies, you can often feel the brakes at work and even hear the squeaking sound. Now, however, there is next to nothing, just the sound of people screaming and then a faint disturbing noise of metal on metal, the sound of brakes failing. You don't need a PhD in physics to understand what's happening. The rain has seeped into the brake system and rendered it virtually useless. I realize now, as we approach one of the last turns of the ride, that we're reaching a very dangerous speed, a speed that feels like the coaster might even jump off the track. Finally, as the coaster straightens out into the last stretch of the ride, I let out a sigh of relief, thinking we've just barely escaped a major catastrophe. Unfortunately, the feeling is short-lived, because as soon as we enter the straightaway where we're supposed to slow down and exit, it becomes apparent that we aren't exiting anything, and my worst fears are suddenly realized. We won't be getting off this coaster from hell, and hell is where we all might end up if things don't change quickly. Don and his daughter are laughing out loud. They seem completely unaware of how serious the situation really is. But it's apparent to me that we're in big trouble. Everyone else gets the point soon enough, as the coaster roars right through the exit station. There's fear now on the faces of the riders, but it's also on the faces of the college kids operating the ride, coupled with a helpless look of bewilderment. The brakes have been rendered almost inoperable from the rain, and a hopeless feeling suddenly consumes everyone. We again begin climbing the 100-foot peak, listening to the clanking of the giant chain drive pulling us upward, closer and closer to the summit. Our situation seems grave. What horror awaits us after the first drop? I think, maybe it's time to start praying? And I'm not alone. Now people are really getting scared. Everyone is aware of our predicament, especially since the skies have really opened. A driving rain beats against the coaster. This no longer seems like a benign thrill. I ask myself, is this a dream? It can't really be happening. Have I entered the twilight zone? We're falling again now, faster than ever, careening through turns, seemingly out of control, no brakes, no hope of stopping, and moving at a speed far exceeding the safety limits of the ride. Seemingly in some sort of crazy death spiral. Some riders on the coaster are screaming their fucking brains out, while others are completely silent, with a blank look of fear mixed with panic and confusion. We're all wondering whether we're going to jump the track and end up mangled somewhere far below. Soon, though, by the grace of God, we're approaching the final turn again, just before the track straightens out and funnels into the exit station. The brakes aren't squeaking anymore, they've probably been literally sheared off by the friction produced by the runaway ride. The attendants are standing there together, 5 or 6 of them, arguing about what to do. I twist in my seat and try to get their attention. Shut it down. What? Turn off the fucking motor, you idiots. Again we start ascending to the top of the giant tower to an almost certain horrific ending. Suddenly everything stops. No more clanking sound from the chain drive. No more screams from the riders. A weird calm overtakes everyone. Apparently the operators have finally done what they should have done in the first place, cut the power to the giant motor running the chain drive. The coaster stops dead in its tracks. We're stuck on the first giant hill. A little scary, but preferable to the alternative. The horror show is over. After a while security guards ascend a catwalk, accompanied by sighs of relief and cheers of happiness from all concerned. Slowly and carefully, one at a time, the guards escort us down the narrow catwalk to safety. Don is holding his daughter, who is visibly shaken. She's not the only one. I've never been on a runaway roller coaster before, and it occurs to me for a moment that it's the perfect metaphor for the way I feel in general right now, like my life is completely out of control. As if being in KISS is a lot like riding a roller coaster that just won't stop. And there is nothing I can do about it? Is this a lesson from someone trying to reach me and make me realize my predicament? A messenger in the form of a giant machine? Maybe so, but I won't realize it or act upon it until much later. The pace never slowed. We released 2 more studio albums in a span of 7 months, Rock and Roll Over in November 1976, and Love Gun in June 1977. In less than 3.5 years KISS had funneled an incredible amount of music into the marketplace, 6 studio albums and 1 double live record. We never stopped touring, either. Sometimes the road was a blast, sometimes it was a drag. And once in a while it was nearly fatal. Just a few weeks after the release of Rock and Roll Over, on December 12, 1976, to be precise, at the start of a show at the Lakeland, Florida, Civic Center, I was electrocuted and nearly killed. Here's how it happened: we were supposed to enter the stage by walking down a set of stairs. Every entrance involving stairs was a challenge for us, given the platform shoes we wore. Usually we'd hold tightly to a railing to make sure we didn't slip or fall. Well, on this particular night my guitar wasn't appropriately grounded, so when I touched the metal railing on the staircase I got hit with a big dose of electricity. I didn't even get to the stage before it happened. I was just about to start going down and I touched the railing at the top of the staircase and got thrown backward onto the platform above the amps. I don't think the other guys in the band even realized what had happened, maybe they just thought I'd slipped or something. They continued to march toward the stage and began playing. Meanwhile, I was flat on my back, stunned nearly to the point of unconsciousness. Some guys from our road crew quickly picked me up and carried me down the back staircase, while the band kept playing. I was out of it for a while. I had burns on my fingertips, that's how much voltage there was. Eventually the guys realized I wasn't coming out, and they stopped the show and came back behind the amps to check on me. I hadn't even gone back to the dressing room yet, I was just sitting there, disoriented, trying to get my bearings. As my head cleared I could hear the audience chanting, "We want Ace! We want Ace!" That got my adrenaline going, and after about 5 more minutes or so I went back out and played the entire concert. I had a nasty headache and my fingers were a little numb, but what the hell? The show must go on, right? We all performed at less than peak physical condition at one time or another. There were a few occasions when I could hardly walk because of knee pain and one of the docs would come backstage and shoot me up with needles and I'd go out and play. Paul was sick plenty of times and they'd shoot him up with something to get him through the show. When you've got 20,000 seats sold, you do whatever you can to get out on the stage. That's just the way it works. If there was one good thing to come out of that night, it was the fact that it provided the impetus for one of my favorite Kiss songs, and the first on which I had the balls to sing lead. The guys had urged me to write about my near-death experience, and while electricity runs through the song and did indeed provide the initial spark of inspiration, the end result is a tune that's less about getting fried on stage than it is about getting laid afterward. A good Kiss song, in other words. Shock me, make me feel better, oh yeah come on and shock me, put on your black leather baby, I'm down to the bare wire shock me, we can come together thanks to the return of Eddie Kramer, my favorite producer and engineer. Rock and Roll Over was a more enjoyable experience than Destroyer had been. It's a good record, more true to the original Kiss mission than Destroyer had been, and helped placate some of the fans who were angered by the studio gimmicks of Bob Ezrin on Destroyer. Rock and Roll Over was an unqualified success, shipping platinum and producing another hit single sung by Peter, Hard Luck Woman, as well as Calling Dr. Love, which would become something of a Kiss classic. Eddie wanted a return to the rawer sound of earlier Kiss albums, so we recorded the album live at the old Nanuet Star Theater in Rockland County, about 20 miles north of New York City, and then mixed it at the record plant. The acoustics at the Star were incredible, and Eddie had us use every inch of the place, setting up instruments in different places to get different types of sounds. At one point he even had Peter playing drums in the bathroom. There was also another really nice feature about recording in Nanuet. I had recently married Jeanette and we'd settled in Tarrytown, New York, which was just across the Hudson River. All I had to do was roll out of bed and shoot west across the Tappan Zee Bridge and I was there in 10 minutes. I think my guitar playing on Rock and Roll Over is solid, and I know that I felt more connected to the album while we were recording. That's probably due to Eddie as much as anything else. But the truth is that while I like the record a lot, it was the first Kiss album on which I did not contribute a single composition. I didn't feel good about that. I thought of myself as a writer as well as a guitar player, and I had no one but myself to blame. Yeah, it's true that in any band with 4 strong personalities and big egos, there's a certain amount of time spent marking your territory. Everybody wants to write and sing, everyone. Everyone wants the spotlight. I was no different. But if you're not bringing material to the table, you can't really complain, can you? So I sat down and wrote Shock Me. Everyone loved it and agreed that it belonged on the next album, Love Gun. My initial thought, as usual, was to turn it over to Gene or Paul and let them handle the vocals. To my surprise, they resisted. "You should sing this one yourself," Paul said. "It's way overdue." And that's how I wound up flat on my back on the floor of a studio at the record plant, trying to relax, with the lights turned down low and Eddie Kramer at the board, encouraging me to sing from the gut. Which is exactly what I did. I like Love Gun a lot, I'm proud of the whole album. There are a few things on it, though, that really make me smile. Like some of my leads, and the vocal on Shock Me. It never actually occurred to me until that album that I was a viable singer. What I learned is that you don't have to be a trained vocalist to be a rock singer, any more than you have to be a classically trained musician to play guitar. Just believe in what you're doing and the audience will go along for the ride. Looking back on it now, There are a lot of things about the Kiss marketing machine that make me laugh, and a few that make me cringe. Every time I thought we'd reached a new high, or low, the bar was moved ever so slightly. The cardboard love gun that was included in every copy of Love Gun, for example. To the relief of parents of teenagers all over the world, this gimmick was merely a toy gun, and not the giant dildo some may have expected. We also included a page of Kiss tattoos that were actual duplicates of tattoos we had on our arms. That was a good one. Cheap and effective. More expensive, and more ambitious by miles, was the first Kiss comic book, produced by Marvel Comics in 1977. We got to meet the great Stan Lee, creator of Spider-Man and the Incredible Hulk. I thought Stan was cool, but Gene was the real fanboy, trailing Stan around and asking him questions about everything he'd written over the last 30 years. Gene was and is a comic book fanatic. He told me once that when he first arrived in the United States from Israel, the first thing he learned to read was a comic book. I guess he never stopped, which at least partially explains how he came up with his character for Kiss. I was a little bit of a fan, but I could take them or leave them. I was intrigued by the superhero aspect of comic books, but it was the artwork that really grabbed my attention. Predictably, the Kiss comic book wasn't allowed to simply sneak into the marketplace. Like everything else we did, its birth was accompanied by a wild publicity stunt. We all gathered at the printing plant in Buffalo, New York, where the comic would be produced, and together we each donated a vial of blood, which we then poured into a vat of red ink, which was mixed in with the actual ink that would be used to print the comic books. I'm not sure exactly what this was supposed to signify, but as a marketing stunt it worked beautifully. Fans thought it was awesome, critics thought it was ridiculous, and conservative and religious groups were repulsed, claiming that the stunt provided further evidence that Kiss was doing the devil's work, and that possibly we were vampires. To which we could only reply, bullshit. The marketing silliness reached a peak of sorts with Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, a 1978 made-for television movie with a plot so ridiculous that I start laughing just thinking about it. We played superhero versions of ourselves, locked in a battle with a demented scientist bent on taking over a popular amusement park by creating 4 androids that looked just like us. How could anyone make this shit up? It wasn't the greatest movie, but that never bothered me because I wasn't under the impression that anyone expected it to be anything other than a ridiculous farce, including the people who wrote, directed, and produced it. If you look at it now, the movie seems kind of campy and cool. The problem is, it wasn't meant to be that way. I watch it now and get a kick out of it, but I know Gene is embarrassed about it. Then again, Gene takes everything so fucking seriously, which is ironic since he was the one who always claimed to be happy that Kiss was selling out arenas and moving millions of records, without regard for artistic integrity. How the hell do you make a movie called Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park and expect people not to laugh? I also heard that when he saw This Is Spinal Tap he didn't think it was very funny. To each his own. I personally thought it was hysterical. There were a lot of bad ideas surrounding that TV movie project, the main one being, who in their right mind thought the 4 guys in Kiss could act? I suppose you could argue that all rock stars are actors, and obviously more than a few of them have made successful transitions to the big screen. In Kiss we were already wearing makeup and portraying characters whenever we went on stage, so maybe it seemed like we'd have an easier time than most. When I first heard about the project, I thought it sounded like it might be kind of fun. But I didn't take it seriously at all, and in very short order I discovered that acting was a lot less interesting and enjoyable than I'd suspected. I should have had some idea what to expect when I got the original script and discovered that I didn't have a single line of dialogue. Not one. Every time my character was supposed to speak, the only thing that would come out of his mouth was the sound of a parrot, awk. That's exactly what was written on the page. 3 capital letters, A, W, K. Awk. I guess the writers had picked up on a quirk of my personality, although I'm not sure where they got the information. Sometimes when I'd get loaded and didn't want to engage in conversation, I'd mimic the squawk of a parrot until the other person gave up and went away. Pretty silly, I admit. And that was the Ace Frehley persona the screenwriters wanted to present. Or maybe they just thought I was too stoned or drunk to remember any of my lines, so they tried to keep it as simple as possible. When I first saw the script, I didn't know what to think. Was it a joke? If so, I didn't find it particularly amusing. What the fuck is this? I asked Bill. I've got no lines in this stupid fucking movie. Why am I wasting my time? He laughed. What do you want me to do, Ace? Tell them to rewrite it? They did, and almost magically I had the ability to talk. I even had amazing superpowers that allowed me to transport the whole band at will to another location. So I took a deep breath and decided to give the project my best shot. A lot of Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park was filmed on location at Magic Mountain, where we actually performed a somewhat staged Kiss concert, although most of the interior scenes were done at Culver City Studios. Regardless of where we were filming, I had to be on set at 8 o'clock in the morning, which was a complete drag for me in those days. The band was staying at a posh hotel in Beverly Hills, a good 45 minutes away by car. And it wasn't like I was getting 8 hours of beauty sleep each night. I was busy being Ace, hitting the clubs, sometimes partying until the wee hours. Who the hell wants to get up at 7 a.m. with a hangover? Not me, that's for sure. Especially when I never knew exactly how much of my time would be required. It didn't take long to figure out that most of the movie-making process was about hanging out in your trailer all day, waiting for someone to tell you that you were needed on the set. A couple of times during the movie I arrived bright and early, threw on my makeup and costume, and got all ready to go, and then sat in my trailer. After an hour or two, one of the assistant directors would stop by and say, "You know what, Ace? We're doing some close-ups on Gene this morning, so I don't think we're going to need you until after lunch. Why don't you relax for a while?" That really made me crazy. Here I was, one of the stars of the film, and you'd think maybe they could have been a little more considerate? Maybe let me know the night before? Don't these fucking people plan? Truth is, I was doing a lot of coke at the time and my nerves were becoming frayed, to say the least. I was getting an ounce of blow delivered to my trailer about once a week. The delivery boy was actually one of the actors on the set, he had a minor role in the film. It was really nuts. We each had our own trailer to hang in. I filled my fridge with cold beer and champagne, and since there was a lot of downtime I indulged in the white powder frequently and followed up with whatever was handy. You'd be surprised what was handy on a movie set in Los Angeles in the 70s. The actor supplying me used to put the coke in his character's hat and act like we were buddies just having a cold one together in my trailer. He actually went on to become a pretty well-known character actor down the road, with roles in several big Hollywood hits. For the most part, I was clueless. I didn't realize that this was the way movies worked, that downtime was a big part of an actor's day, maybe the biggest part. And so the third or fourth time that it happened, I snapped. Totally went off on the producer. When confronted, he really didn't have much to say in his defense in regard to how the shooting schedule was being handled, which didn't make me feel any better. Fuck this, I said to myself. Then I shouted, "I'm outta here." Which, as I realize now, was extremely unprofessional behavior. I went back into my trailer, quickly washed off my makeup and changed into my regular clothes, snorted a couple of lines and washed it down with a cold one, and then jumped into my Mercedes. I drove quietly off the lot, trying not to attract too much attention, but in the rearview mirror I could see my bodyguard and road manager in hot pursuit. Well, not so hot, actually. I let them follow me for a while as I bided my time until we got into a more familiar area. The traffic was becoming dense, and I began making lefts and rights, slowly and methodically trying to lose them, until finally I just hit the gas and pulled away, leaving them stuck behind a truck at a red light. The next thing I knew, I was on my own, somewhere in the suburbs of Los Angeles, hanging out at a bar, washing down some tranquilizers with a beer. I calmed down after a while and soon began feeling very guilty about sounding off to the producer. Hell, he'd only been doing his job, and I was making it harder for him. Maybe the script and schedule changes had occurred that morning and there was nothing he could do about it. And I was acting like a spoiled brat. I realize now that all the cocaine and alcohol was really starting to affect my judgment and how I perceived life in general, not just within the band. But now I faced a dilemma: do I run back with my tail between legs, or skip a day of shooting and hope it all blows over? I had similar experiences at times with Kiss. Something would piss me off and I'd lose my temper and disappear for a while. I didn't really like confrontation, so I'd just go off on my own and medicate myself until I felt better. It was typical behavior for an addict. I see that so clearly now. Unfortunately, I was oblivious to my actions at the time. In any case, for some strange reason that day I left the bar and decided to get some fresh air. The sun was shining, but not too hot, and it seemed to improve my mood. I wound up cruising by the La Brea Tar Pits, which is one of the coolest places on earth. I parked the car and got out and began walking around, trying to forgive and forget what had happened earlier. Suddenly I noticed a huge sign promoting a new exhibition at the Los Angeles County Museum of Art, which is located just down the block. I stopped in my tracks. The Treasures of Tutankhamun. Holy shit. The King Tut exhibit was in town. A little background is probably warranted here. I'd always been fascinated with the pyramids and Egyptian culture. I remember reading a book as a teen called Pyramid Power that captured my imagination, and since then I'd dreamed of visiting the pyramids. Well, at this time the Tutankhamun exhibition was touring the United States, and attracting massive crowds wherever it went. Everybody wanted to see the golden mask and the artifacts of the boy king. People would stand in line for hours in cities around the world. A novelty song by Steve Martin called King Tut was a hit single that year. Tut, mania gripped the nation. I know, because I had a pretty good dose of it myself. Funny thing is, I had completely forgotten that the exhibit was going to be in L.A. While we were filming Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park, so I was completely taken aback when I stumbled across it that day. I thought to myself, wow, if I could just get in there, everything will be alright. But you couldn't get in without a ticket, and that day's exhibition had sold out weeks in advance. I wandered around outside the museum for a while, staring at the window, trying to imagine what it looked like inside, until suddenly a young woman approached me. "Excuse me, sir." She was probably in her early 30s, with a couple of kids in tow. "Yes. Would you like to go inside? I have an extra ticket." "Really?" I asked. "How much do you want for it?" She smiled and shook her head. "That's okay. You just enjoy the show." She pulled the ticket out of her purse and placed it in my hand. Then she walked away, leaving me standing there alone, dumbstruck by my good fortune. This lady could have scalped that ticket for a couple of $100. I would have paid that much. Instead she gave it away, and I don't think she had any idea who I was. I was just a guy with long hair hanging out in front of the Museum of Art, looking like he needed a ticket for the King Tut exhibit. Who was she, really? Possibly a messenger sent from above intervening in my life? I have no idea, but this kind of thing has happened to me before too often for it to be dismissed as coincidence. People come out of nowhere to provide assistance or demonstrate kindness. A mysterious luck seems to always pull me out of deep or deadly shit. Luck and guardian angels have always been something I felt were with me, and I believe they still are today. 5 minutes later I was inside the museum, wandering around, blissfully soaking up the Egyptian atmosphere, looking at all these fascinating artifacts, feeling like I'd been transported thousands of years back into the past. By the time I walked out of the museum some 3 hours later, I felt completely at ease with myself and the world around me. Thinking back now about that afternoon and remembering how upset I was before visiting the exhibit, there are really only 2 words that best describe what happened to me: divine intervention. I left the exhibit with a feeling of extraordinary well-being and peace. I drove to the set, apologized to the director and producer for my short fuse and absence, and promised that I would behave better in the future. They accepted my apology and everything seemed to be okay. I didn't learn until much later, when I saw the movie for the first time, that filming had gone on without me that day, including a scene in which our characters waged an epic battle with Frankenstein, Dracula, and the Wolfman in the park's Chamber of Horrors. My character was a big part of that, and in the opening scenes I am present, but once the action starts to pick up someone else takes over. Under the best of circumstances the whole thing would have looked silly, but on top of that the director had enlisted the services of my stunt double to finish the remaining shots in the scene. Usually a stunt double is used only in distant shots or quick cutaways. But in this case my double was a black man. A terrific guy. Hell of a stunt double, too, but he didn't look anything like me facially, and even with all the makeup on it was painfully obvious. I mean, you can see it clearly if you watch the movie. During the fight scene in the Chamber of Horrors with Frankenstein, he gets knocked around and thrown into a pillar with a couple of skeletons tied to it. Just hit the pause button. Hey, man, that's not Ace. That's a black dude. Very funny stuff, and let's face it, would you expect anything less from the producers who made the Scooby-Doo cartoons? The funniest day of shooting, though, was probably the one when we did the scene at the pool, in which we are confronted by the park manager and head of security about Gene knocking around a few security guards the night before. In the beginning the park manager rapidly walks into the scene and toward us, from the other side of the pool. Well, on the first or second take he tripped on one of the rocks and took a bad tumble and fell flat on his face and hands. For every take after that I was completely overtaken by the mental image of him stumbling. I must have ruined at least 25 takes with my laughter. On the first few takes the other guys joined in, but after that, I was pretty much alone. It was very embarrassing for the other actor and me, but I absolutely lost all control of myself. The incident reminds me of when I was a little kid and routinely got busted for cracking up in school or in church. That was the funniest part of the movie, but the most fun was at night while we were shooting at Magic Mountain. I bought a motorbike while we were out there. The park was closed to the public after dark, so I had free rein on the smooth asphalt roads throughout the facility. Between takes I'd jump on the bike with a nice buzz and ride around the whole park without a care in the world. Remember back in the Bronx when I was a kid we didn't have motorbikes, so it was really my first chance to enjoy myself without having to worry about other traffic. It put a smile on my face, for sure, but I nearly broke my neck a few times. Typical for me, though. Just being Ace. Oh, well. Those were just some of the many things that happened, or went wrong, on Kiss Meets the Phantom of the Park. None of it meant all that much to me. The whole thing was a goof. If you take it in that light, it's okay, almost like a Saturday morning kids show or a Japanese sci-fi flick. Come on, who doesn't like Mothra and Rotten? From day one I thought it was going to be campy and silly. Gene, unfortunately, took the whole process very seriously and was infatuated with making movies. I also believe it was the spark that got him thinking he could become a movie star. In fact, he did a few more films afterward, too, mistakenly thinking he could act. Kiss Meets the Phantom was a huge embarrassment for him, I think. For me? I had a few laughs and made some new friends and had a very interesting experience off the set. I didn't really take it seriously from the outset and didn't think much about it once it was over. To be honest, I thought it was a natural step in the devolution of Kiss. We got exactly what we deserved, and exactly what most people expected. By the time the movie came out, it was apparent that we all were getting complacent and wanted to do other things. Our two previous albums, Alive 2 and Double Platinum, were basically compilations, bringing to 9 the total number of Kiss albums. All 9 were released in the span of 4 years. I remember at the end of the shoot, sitting around a table with the other guys in the band, with Bill Aucoin and some of our business advisors and accountants, and talking about how we were going to fill the next 6 months. Bill suggested that instead of making another Kiss record, each of us should consider a solo project. I thought it was a great idea. We could all pursue our musical interests, take a turn in the spotlight, and give fans a virtual buffet table of choices from the guys in Kiss. Creatively and commercially, it seemed to make a lot of sense, and it had the additional benefit of giving us a break from each other. We had spent so much time with each other over the previous 5 years that it was inevitable for tensions to arise. I felt good about my solo project from the beginning, mainly because I knew I'd be teaming up with Eddie Kramer. I had a lot of confidence in Eddie. I respected him and he respected me. We'd been a good team on Kiss albums, and there was no reason to think we wouldn't work well together on a solo venture. Apparently, though, no one else shared my confidence. I still remember Gene and Paul saying to me, in front of at least a dozen people, "Hey, Ace, if you need some help on your record, don't hesitate to call." It wasn't said with malice, but neither was it said with sincerity. There was a tone of condescension to it, like you're gonna need help. Remember, Paul and Gene dominated every Kiss album. They wrote and sang most of the songs. They were the dominant personalities. I'm sure they figured my album would bomb, or that maybe I wouldn't even get it done. If you want to give them the benefit of the doubt, you could say they were trying to look generous in front of our management team by offering their assistance if I needed it. You know, because I was Crazy Ace, Unreliable Ace, the spaceman. Regardless, I remember walking out of that meeting and thinking, I'm gonna show these fuckers, and I'm gonna show the world. For the first time in a long time, I felt motivated. When somebody says to me, you can't do that, it makes me want to do it all the more. Even as a teenager, when my parents would say that I was the black sheep, I found it inspirational in a weird sort of way. Yeah, I had a drinking problem. I had a drug problem. I lacked some confidence, but I knew I had the chops. After all, I was the lead guitarist in one of the biggest rock groups in the world. I knew I had the ability to make a great solo record. It was just a matter of staying focused and teaming up with the right producer. Admittedly, focus has never been a strong suit of mine, only later on in life was I diagnosed with attention deficit disorder. I don't work well under the pressure of a deadline, and I find it almost impossible to force myself to be creative. Gene once told me, Ace, I write a song every day. I don't get that. How can you force yourself to write? Writing has to be a creative process, and if you're not feeling creative, it just won't work well. Sometimes I won't write a song for weeks. Then, on a given weekend, I might write 2 or 3 songs. When the juices are flowing, you have to be ready. When they aren't flowing, you do something else, hop on a motorcycle, go fishing, have a party, or maybe build a remote-controlled helicopter. Whatever. Fill the time and divert your attention until you feel inspired. I never write by formula, either. Sometimes I start a song with a guitar riff, sometimes with a vocal hook or a melody. It varies. Ideas come from anywhere and everywhere: my personal life, books or magazines, movies, and sometimes even dreams. A good idea is a good idea, regardless of the source. In the case of my first solo album, I was lucky to have a few songs already in the vault, tunes that had been rejected on earlier Kiss records. That gave me a head start. I brought them back, did a little rewriting and tweaking, and that helped ease some of the anxiety about going off on my own. Other songs just kind of happened, spontaneous combustion, I guess. It helped, too, that I cleaned up a little bit, although not completely, during the making of the record, usually limiting my alcohol and drug use to the evenings after a long day of recording. I also felt I didn't really have much of a choice. I knew that I couldn't blame anyone else if my solo album bombed. If a Kiss record sucked, I could always chalk it up to Paul's or Gene's megalomania. Not now. This time it was all on me. Whatever praise or blame would be heaped on the record, I'd have to take responsibility. The first thing I did, after getting Eddie Kramer on board, of course, was go out and find a great drummer, since Peter was tied up making his own record. An old friend of mine named Larry Russell, we went to high school together and jammed a little back in the day, came up with this name, Anton Fig. I'd never heard of Anton and wasn't sure if he was right for the project, until I asked Eddie Kramer if he had any suggestions. "You know," he said, "there's this guy I worked with recently named Anton Fig. He's unbelievable. You should check him out." Anton was playing in a band at the time with his two closest friends, Keith and Amanda Lenton. Born in South Africa, he moved to the States in the early 70s and settled down in Boston, where he studied at the New England Conservatory of Music. He later moved to New York City. When I heard his name from two unrelated sources, I figured it was destiny that we meet. So I invited Anton up to a studio in the North Bronx that was run by my friend Eddie Solon, and we jammed for a while. We hit it off right away, both musically and personally. I immediately hired him for the job, and we have enjoyed a lasting friendship in and out of the studio since 1978. He recently performed on my latest solo effort, Anomaly, which was released in September 2009. Anton has had one of the best steady gigs in show business for the last 25 years, as the drummer for David Letter, Man's House Band, featuring Paul Schaefer. He's also one of the busiest session drummers in New York City and has worked with everyone from Mick Jagger, Bob Dylan, and Joe Cocker to Miles Davis, Richie Havens, and Paul Butterfield. When I first started writing songs for Anomaly, one of the compositions was Genghis Khan. Listen to the thundering drum work on that song and you'll understand what makes Anton so special. He holds the pocket back, playing a little behind the beat, just like John Bonham of Led Zeppelin would do. If you listen closely to any Zeppelin tune, you'll find that what gives it that groove is Bonham's drumming. He's never racing ahead of the guitar, he's always holding back. Same with Anton. It's a unique talent, playing slightly behind the beat. It doesn't come naturally for most rock drummers, but when executed properly it sets up a great pocket and can really make a song swing. Anton is one of the most versatile drummers I've ever met. I bring out the best in him, and he brings out the best in me. We have a musical bond. I don't have to say much when we're in the studio. Usually just a few words about tempo and feel and some suggestions about where I might want a fill. He just gets it, plain and simple. When I wrote Genghis Khan, I immediately thought, man, Anton is going to kill this song. I played it with two other drummers prior to Anton, since he was tied up recording, and it just seemed okay, but when Anton got a hold of it he really took the song to the next level. Just as I had envisioned it. Ace Frehley was recorded at the sprawling Colgate Mansion, on the Philston Estate in Sharon, Connecticut, right by Lime Rock Park Speedway. Once elegant, the 100-acre estate had been vacant for a few years and had begun to fall on hard times. The grounds were a bit unkempt. Chips of paint and plaster sometimes fell from the ceiling. but parts of it were still very much intact and impressive. I thought to myself, if only these walls could talk. The library, for example, in which we recorded a lot of the acoustic guitar work, had beautifully carved woodwork and the century textured wallpaper, still intact. It was enormous and grand. I found it to be an inspirational and creative workplace. We used several other rooms to create different acoustic effects. On Fractured Mirror, for instance, we placed microphones at the top of a stairway on the second floor to get a huge, reverberating drum sound. We did a lot of stuff like that. Eddie liked working with me because I didn't put many restraints on him and encouraged him to experiment with unorthodox recording techniques. With Kiss, Paul and Gene usually wanted things done by the book. I didn't even have a book. I was more interested in having fun and taking chances. I'd say, Eddie, don't be afraid to try some crazy stuff, and let's try something you've never done before. Fuck it. Go for it. I'll never forget the first time Eddie flipped the tape over on a 24-track, 2-inch tape machine. I was a little bewildered. What are you doing? I asked. Don't worry. Just play your ass off. That ended up being my first backward guitar solo and it sounded amazing. I asked, where did you learn that? And Eddie went on to tell me what it was like working with Jimi Hendrix at Electric Lady Studios. Eddie always had interesting stories to tell. Sometimes he'd talk about when he worked with the Beatles and the Rolling Stones, or the Kinks at Olympic Sound Studios in London. Once he talked about what it was like recording Led Zeppelin 2, including working with Jimmy Page at the mixing board at the record plant in New York, and I was on the edge of my seat. Eddie also worked with Dionne Warwick, Peter Frampton, Carly Simon, and David Bowie. In my wildest dreams I never thought I'd be working with a producer who had worked with so many people that I love and admire. I felt really privileged at that point and I always wanted to give Eddie my very best performance when he hit the record button. Sometimes we'd put 4 different amps in 4 different places and blend them all together in the mix. Crazy shit. Always pushing the envelope. Sometimes even double-tracking drum fills, like the drum solos in Rip It Out. On Fractured Mirror, Eddie and I achieved a unique metallic bell sound on the guitar. I was playing a Gibson double-neck guitar into a Marshall stack with the volume turned all the way up. I mean, this thing was ready to explode. On one neck I had the pickups on, so if I were to hit the strings on that neck, it would have been loud as hell, but instead I played the picking figure on the other neck. With the pickups off, the sound coming out of the amp was the body resonating through the pickups from the other neck. That's how I got those bell overtones. It's a technique I still use today and you can hear it on an instrumental I recorded and produced for Anomaly titled Fractured Quantum. I was also one of the first guitar players in history to use a synthesizer guitar on record. I used it in the song Ozone, which was lots of fun, and Eddie and my assistant engineer, Rob Freeman, did a great job transferring that sound to tape. The device was called the ARP Avatar and was elementary in design compared to the synthesizers available on the market today. Of the songs I wrote for the first solo album, Fractured Mirror turned out to be one of my most unique and enduring favorites. So much that since then I've recorded 3 more instrumentals in the Fractured series, ending with Fractured Quantum. What's next? I don't know. The most popular song off that record would probably be New York Groove, a song I didn't even write and frankly didn't think that much of the first time I heard it. The credit goes to Eddie's assistant, who suggested the song. Originally recorded by a band called the Hello People, New York Groove was written by Russ Ballard. Russ had a band called Argent in the 70s and I was lucky enough to see them perform in concert as a teen. Eddie pushed hard to include New York Groove on the record. I've always been the kind of guy who will give anything a shot, especially if I respect the person I'm working with, so I agreed. The signature sound of New York Groove is that aka crunch at the beginning. It almost sounds as if it's being created on a guitar using a wah pedal. But it's not. It actually was produced by using a device similar to the talk box used by Joe Walsh and Jeff Beck, and, most famously, Peter Frampton on Frampton Comes Alive. It works like this: a speaker or driver is enclosed in a metal box, into which a tube is inserted. Then a guitar is plugged into an amp, but the speaker output is routed through the box and the signal is routed back from the box into the amp again. The other end of the tube goes into the musician's mouth, allowing him to sing or talk in a manner that sounds as though the words are being produced by the guitar in a weirdly robotic way. Done well, and sparingly, it's an awesome fucking effect. I couldn't master the technique well enough to play the part on my own, so I had my friend Bobby help out. Try to picture this: Bobby sitting there next to me, opening and closing his mouth around the tube while I played guitar. ACKA, aka, aka. It was pretty funny. But it worked. As did another of Eddie's ideas. He suggested we add loud, rhythmic clapping to the song, figuring it would sound better when the song was performed live. To get that effect, we brought in a big, hollow wooden box, and then 3 or 4 of us stomped on it together, as hard as we could. And Eddie recorded the whole thing. It seemed kind of silly at the time, but actually it was brilliant and innovative. They don't do shit like that anymore. Somebody now would just go out and get a stomp box. Or, more likely, they'd grab a digital sample. In those days everything you heard was real. We created all the effects. Today you just press a button or click a mouse. It takes a lot of the fun out of the process, really. I'm all for technology, but I do think it has a tendency to stunt the imagination. After recording the basic tracks in Connecticut, we moved down to Radio City Music Hall. There used to be a recording studio on the top floor. It was wonderful, and I'll tell you why: because the Rockets used to come up and visit all the time. They would rehearse, take a break, look in, see what was going on. Then they'd go 1 or 2 flights up and be sunning themselves on the roof. It was a wonderful, accommodating situation, to say the least. Ace Frehley was released on September 18, 1978. As a matter of fact, all 4 Kiss solo albums were released on that day, a marketing stunt orchestrated by Neil Bogart in an attempt to maximize publicity and sales. I'm still not sure it was the greatest idea in the world. Maybe it would have made more sense to roll the records out slowly, over a period of several months, to give each its time in the spotlight. Instead, Casablanca pressed 500,000 copies of each record and flooded the marketplace on a single day. The results were mixed, to say the least. Critically speaking, Ace Frehley was the most successful of the 4 records. I expected that. My goal was to make a really solid, guitar-based rock album, and I did. The shock, to just about everyone, was that Ace Frehley also was the most successful of the solo albums from a commercial standpoint, outselling the other 3 albums and producing a top 20 single in New York Groove. I was stunned and moved by the response, and especially by the enduring popularity of New York Groove. It's a great song for a guy from the Bronx, which is what I still am after all these years. It was a total departure from both Kiss and my personal style and taste, but it was absolutely the right song at the right time. On every level it works, and I give all the credit to Eddie Kramer. He made it happen, and he's just as responsible as I am for New York Groove becoming a hit. I'm proud of that whole album. It confirmed what I'd always felt, that my musical instincts were strong. For all the success I'd had with Kiss, the experience had somehow managed to erode my confidence and self-esteem. The solo project gave me a chance, it gave all of us a chance to stretch out a bit, to challenge myself artistically. I don't mind admitting that I felt a strong competitive streak during the making of Ace Frehley. I guess there's something wrong if you don't feel that. I wanted to make the best record I could make, and I think we did that. I remember hearing all these stories at the time about what the other guys were doing, how they were putting their records together, and what their strategies were. When I heard that Gene was going to have a bunch of guest stars on his record, I couldn't imagine what he was thinking. Helen Reddy. Really, Gene? What the fuck? Even in Kiss, Gene would sometimes make choices that were so wrong. I know that probably sounds like petty jealousy or envy, given that Kiss remains a rock juggernaut even after all these years, but it's really not. There were a few times when I tried to steer the band away from making what I perceived to be terrible decisions. Peter and I were the ones with street sense, with bullshit detectors, if you will. Paul and Gene had no street sense whatsoever. Especially Gene. He had led a very sheltered, straight life. But his take on certain things was incredibly cynical and jaded. Sometimes he'd come up with ideas and I'd say, "What are you, fucking nuts? You can't do that." It was always about making money, advancing and expanding the brand. It was never about art. Never about music. Never. I was dumbfounded sometimes by the stuff that would come out of Gene's mouth. He didn't know the difference between what was cool and what wasn't cool. I mean, come on. How could you not know that? Helen Reddy, nothing personal, mind you, in 1978, was a very bad idea. Her presence alone is enough to make any Kiss fan say, "Fuck you, Gene." I'm not buying that piece of shit. The people you choose to work with on a solo album says a lot about you, but I don't think Gene realized it. Or maybe he just didn't care. Half the time I didn't know what was going through Gene's mind. But I could always see dollar signs reflected in his eyes.